I'm really excited to be out here to talk to y'all about what I've spent the last, I think it's been 4 years now, teaching our undergraduates at Carolina, all about how adolescence intersects with technology use. So I thought I would start with a little bit of audience participation just to get y'all thinking about this topic of adolescence, right? Why at Carolina have we designed a whole class around adolescence and social media use? So this is some software we use at Carolina. It's called Poll Everywhere. You can scan that QR code. If you go to pollev.com/Rosalie, you can answer this quick little poll question about stereotypes you may have had, that you might hold or you may have heard about adolescence. All right, so when I do this with my students, we see all kinds of stuff there. There's like moody, hormonal, risky, etc. What we tend, disrespectful has popped up there. What we tend to not see are positive traits associated with adolescence. And I think that is really a shame. But these kind of negative or potential, these connotations, negative connotations about adolescence, or this framing of adolescence as a risky, potentially dangerous, not so fun time, that is not specific to like the here and now. It's not just specific to modern times. Here's a quote from Jean-Jacques Rousseau in the late 1700s, also speaking about adolescence. He is neither child nor man. Frequent outbreaks of anger, stirring of the mind. He becomes deaf to the voice he used to obey. He is a lion in a fever. He distrusts his keeper and refuses to be controlled. Keep the hand on the helm or all is lost. Right? This is very dramatic. And this is from the late 1700s. I don't know how much trouble you get into as an adolescent then, but they were already worried about it then. Right? Slightly more recently, 1958, Anna Freud, the famous Sigmund Freud's daughter, to be normal during the adolescent period is by itself abnormal. Right? And if you've ever browsed the bookshelves of your local bookstore trying to find parenting advice for your teen, what are the types of things that you see, right? Let's see, is my pointer going to work today? Nope. So yes, your teen is crazy. Why do they act that way? When things get crazy with your teen, what you're supposed to do? All right, so we have all these really scary framings about adolescence as being recognizing that adolescence is a special time, but making it seem like a really fraught and terrible time. Right? And one potential danger of this, of kind of approaching this adolescent period with a like, oh my gosh, watch out, is that these stereotypes can actually become self-fulfilling prophecies. So there's a research study where they brought a bunch of teens and their mothers into the lab when they were in when the teens were in 6th and 7th grade, and asked them how much do they endorse stereotypes of adolescence as being a time of like risk-taking and rebelliousness. And what they found was both the degree to which the teens themselves believe those stereotypes and the mothers believed those stereotypes. When they followed up with them 2 years later, those who highly endorsed the stereotypes, those teens were more likely to have actually engaged in more dangerous, risky behavior, rule-breaking behavior, disobeying their families, etc. All right, so there's this possibility that if you really believe that all these things are going to happen during adolescence, you might actually in some way like influence it or like manifest it, ease it along into that process. So we can think about adolescence and how to frame this time period in this potentially negative way, right? So this is some text from a paper about how, for pediatricians, counseling them on how to talk to their patients about adolescence. So you could say adolescence is a time of many changes with lots of ups and downs. Make sure that your teenager avoids any risky behaviors and protect them from what we know is a dangerous world. Right? Not that different from what Rousseau said hundreds of years ago. Or maybe we can reframe this in a more positive light, that adolescence is an exciting time when young people explore the world and discover who they are. An opportunity to be a guide on their journey, right? So same idea, it's this time of exploring the world, but you can frame that as in a positive way. You're a guide, not their keeper. And theoretically or ideally, that can help everyone have a more positive adolescent experience. Right, so in our class at Carolina, we devote this whole class to adolescence, and it kind of raises the question of, well, what even do we mean by adolescence? So here I would like some more audience participation. We'll do what we call a think, pair, share at Carolina. So I want you to think about how we might actually define adolescence. Right? Are there some biological markers that tell us when someone, yes, now you're an adolescent, And after you've reached this marker, and you're not an adolescent anymore, think about maybe how social relationships might be different, cultural factors, educational factors, occupational factors, or even age, how these things might come together to help us come up with a definition of adolescence. All right, so I'm going to give y'all like a minute to talk amongst yourselves, make a friend, and then I'll ask for folks to share what they discussed. Go. All right, let's go ahead and wind things down and bring it back together. All right, so hopefully y'all had some nice discussions, maybe made a new friend. Would anyone like to raise their hand and share what y'all discussed? What's your definition of adolescence? How do you know if you're a parent, your teen is now an adolescent and not just a kid? It's a safe space in here. It's not being graded. Yeah, in the back. Identity, can you elaborate a bit more? Identity? Great. Great, so thinking about who they want to be, thinking about maybe their family's values and what they might want to keep or carry on into their own lives. Great, other things that change, Mary Beth? Puberty, right? So it is a physical change that we can see happening to the bodies. Got a hand in the back? Yeah. Great. Right, so a time of defining what sort of adult or individual they might be or might become. Right, and over here, yeah. Great. Right, so changes in your body may be related to puberty that you may or may not enjoy, and then also trying to figure out who you're going to be. Is that the second part? More independent. Thank you. There we go. Yes. Right. We're increasing independence for yourself away from your family. Right. So we tend to think about adolescence as this time of change. Right. So our bodies change. We maybe spend a lot of time teaching kids about what to expect in health class. But also it's a time of tremendous change in brain development, which I'm going to tell y'all about in greater detail in just a bit. And then we think these bodily changes that kick off these brain changes are also then kicking off changes in their social roles. So a few of y'all have alluded to that, right? So trying to figure out where their place is in their family, trying to find more independence from their family to be their own person, right? Find their own sense of identity. And that might also mean increasing importance of friends, in caring increasingly about what your friends think about you, maybe listening to your friends rather than listening to your parents, and also really caring a lot more broadly about your peers, not necessarily people close to you, but just kind of people who you see as your peer group. So maybe caring more about like your social status, or if we're talking about being online, right? How is your online account getting likes or follows, et cetera. All right, so in this piece about changing brains, I do think as neuroscientists we've done a pretty good job of kind of getting across the idea that adolescent brains are special, but still you often still see cartoons like this, which are maybe fun to look at, thinking about teenagers, thinking about the birds and the bees and rebellion, but that's actually not what is more, for me, most interesting as a neuroscientist. So as a neuroscientist, there's actually a lot of really important changes that are happening at a neuronal level, at a cellular level, that actually impacts the developing adolescent. So let's see if we can get this video to play.
The adolescent period is absolutely amazing. People often give it a negative approach, saying, oh, it's a time where adolescents are going to lose their mind, or they're just immature, or raging hormones drive them crazy. These are all not only wrong, but they're myths that mislead us and actually disempower us. Whether we're adults or adolescents, they actually give us the wrong message and they make it so there's nothing we can do. So what is actually the truth? The truth is that instead of raging hormones, what's happening is we have remodeling in the brain. In ways we never could have predicted, we now understand two big things are happening in the brain. Things you as an adult can support adolescents in developing well, and if you're an adolescent, you actually can use this to help your brain grow in an optimal way. What are those two things? The brain is pruning itself. So imagine that in childhood, you're growing like a tree and establishing all these branches and all these leaves are growing. In the brain, that means connections among the basic cell, the neuron, called synapses, are being established. And you're soaking in the knowledge of the world, and that's beautiful. The tree is just growing, growing, growing. But then what happens, that surprised everyone, is the brain begins to prune itself. You start carving away some of those leaves, some of the smaller branches, even some of the larger branches. And the reason for the pruning is to specialize the brain. While the child is developing in ways that are really generalized, learning everything they can about everything they can, an adolescent is going to begin to find their passion, to actually find things they like, things they really love doing, and to drive their development in that way. So pruning is actually a use it or lose it principle underneath it. That if you don't use something, you're going to lose it. So if you like sports or like dancing or like music, do those things so you continue to establish those circuits. The second thing that happens in the remodeling adolescent brain is myelin formation. Myelin is a healthy sheath that allows connected neurons to communicate with each other in a much more effective way. How? It's 100 times faster, the signal that's sent down a neuron to communicate with another neuron, 100 times faster, and after it fires off, it's 30 times shorter the resting period that happens. 30 times 100 is 3,000. So when you've put down myelin, you've made your neurons communicate 3,000 times more effectively. That's a great thing. Now the great thing too is that you as an adolescent can actually use the focus of your attention to be aware of your emotions, aware of other people, to be engaging in activities, to be doing things with your thoughts that actually reinforce the parts of your brain you want to hold on to. So the good news about the remodeling story is that a field called neuroplasticity, how the brain responds to experience, shows us that what you do with your mind can change the activity and therefore the structure of your brain. So if you then come up with the statement that the ultimate goal of brain remodeling is to make an integrated brain, to differentiate areas, that's the pruning, and myelinate them, that's the linkage. When you increase differentiation and linkage, you make the brain more integrated. And an integrated brain is the pathway toward well-being.
All right, so the two big brain remodeling mechanisms that are happening is synaptic pruning. So this allows the brain to become more specialized, and then myelination makes the brain more efficient. So what does this actually look like in developing brain? So these are images of neurons, of brain cells, at birth, at 6 years of age, and at 14 years of age. So let's see if I can find my pointer. Sometimes it disappears. Oh, there it was. There it is. Okay. So each of these little kind of triangular blobs represent a neuron, and these neurons send out branches to communicate with other neurons. So you can see at birth, right, this is a newborn baby. They just came into the world. There's not that many neurons going on. By 6 years of age, gone from a baby to like a walking, talking little person, you see this tremendous density within these neurons, right? All those branches are interweaved and stuck together. And then in our 14-year-old, we still have lots of neurons that are present, but now their branches have been pruned back, right? So we still see the individual neurons, but it's no longer kind of this jumbled tangle of connections. They've been pruned away. And this allows the brain to become more specialized, right? So why would we prune away connections? It seems like having more connections might be better. It actually is really metabolically expensive to maintain all of these connections throughout the entire brain. So what we think is happening during adolescence is kind of this brain is realizing, you know, I've been around for a while, I'm going through this puberty process, it seems I'm going to be settling into my adult form. I should know by now which connections are important. The ones I've been using, those are ones that we'll keep. And the ones that I'm not using as much, we can prune those away, right? Get rid of them, don't spend the energy maintaining them. If we're not using it, it's okay to lose it and get rid of it, right? So this is what's letting that brain become more specialized. And then that process of myelination, that is laying down white matter on these neurons. At the top, these are images of the brain structure at 2 weeks of age, at 1 year, and then at 2 years. And you can see even in those first 2 years, the increase in white matter that's happening as this myelination process is laid down. These images below are showing myelinated tracts throughout the brain in a baby, a 1-year-old, and then an adult brain. So as we get older, this process of myelination is also happening and speeding up the connections of our brain, letting it be much more efficient, letting our neurons communicate with each other much more quickly. Right, so these changes that are happening to the brain, that neuroplasticity that Dr. Siegel mentioned in the video, this can make the brain really vulnerable. So a number of different mental health issues like substance use disorders, anxiety disorders, mood disorders, and schizophrenia, they tend to emerge during adolescence, and we think it has something to do with just how plastic that brain is. That with all these changes are happening, right, there's some risk of maybe these changes going a little bit awry, or of potentially if there's some kind of maladaptive behaviors or patterns or ways of thinking, that those will kind of get stuck in that brain and that use it or lose it piece, right? If we're thinking in we have poor coping mechanisms that we're using all the time, those are the tracks that are going to get kept. But you can also think about this as a time of great opportunity. That is a time for intervention. It is a time for setting the brain off on a healthy path of development. Now, some of y'all, or many of y'all, maybe all of y'all may have heard that the Surgeon General a few years ago has declared that we are in a youth mental health crisis. So back in 21, he issued this advisory saying that youth mental health has been a growing issue, and now we're actually declaring it kind of an official crisis. The rates of things like depression, anxiety, and self-harm have been increasing over the last few decades. And then just last year, he narrowed in a little bit more and issued a social media and youth mental health advisory. If you go and look this up on the Surgeon General's website, it's actually a really well-written document. It runs through both the pros and cons of adolescent social media use and has some really nice kind of tractable action items for families and teachers, researchers, and the tech companies as well. All right, so why might it be the case that we have to really be concerned about adolescents and mental health use, adolescents' mental health and social media use? Well, it turns out that the remodeling and the changing that's happening in that adolescent brain, it's not kind of equally distributed throughout the brain. Instead, there are some parts of the brain that are kind of maturing a little bit more quickly or becoming extra sensitive during adolescence. So one example of this is the brain's reward processing network. This is the part of our brain that tells us, like, this feels good, doing this is going to bring you something that feels nice, it's going to bring you a little bit of reward. And we see that activation in these brain regions here representing these two dots. These are deep brain regions that process reward. Activation is higher in these regions for adolescents compared to children and adults. And this is actually something that holds not just for humans, but also for animals as well, that we see like juvenile rats are more likely to seek out rewards. Juvenile mice also are more likely to seek out rewards. Potentially going back to this idea of adolescence as this time of greater independence, maybe it's good to really want to seek out new experiences and find your own way in the world. But it does suggest that adolescents might care about rewards more and might experience them a little bit more intensely, might be more motivated to seek out rewards. And if we look at this through the lens of thinking about their technology use, right, what is your smartphone? It's a little reward machine that you can carry around with you right in your pocket, right? That there are folks who will call your phone's a little slot machine because you never know, the next time you pick it up, maybe this time there's going to be a notification from your friend that's going to make you feel good. Or maybe this TikTok video is a bit boring, but it's going to play the next one. That's not great. Oh, this one's kind of funny. I'm going to keep on watching. Right? So this might suggest that adolescents might find social media and technology a little more alluring than children and adults might. And then another brain network that is really hypersensitive, really seems to come online during adolescence, is the social processing network. So this image is showing activation in this, we call this medial prefrontal cortex region. Sort of, if you slice my brain down here, it's right here, kind of above your forehead, inside your forehead, above your eyeballs. That brain region is really important for thinking about yourself and thinking about other people. And we also see activation in that brain region peak during adolescence as well. That adolescents seem to have a kind of heightened response to thinking about other people, thinking about them, or thinking about themselves compared to children and adults. Right, so we say here too that adolescence is a sensitive period for social processing, and this is probably unsurprising to any of y'all who have parented an adolescent or remember what it's like to be an adolescent, right? This is what drives adolescents to want to spend a lot of time with their friends. That can be a really good thing. It can drive them to also really care about how their friends think about them and maybe start comparing themselves to others quite a bit to figure out their own sense of self-worth. And this is where things might start to become a little bit problematic. So this kind of intersection of the sensitivity to social content and the sensitivity to reward, right? This makes adolescents a pretty ideal social media user, right? What is social media? Social interactions that bring us rewards all the time, right? So this might be one potential reason why adolescents really want to be on social media. They're drawn to interacting with their friends that way. And then the last piece about the developing brain, I'm going to show you this video here where, so these for, there we go. So this is image representing brain development from age 4 to age 22. As the colors change, they're going to show when that brain region has reached maturity. So when it hits purple, blue to purple is when that region has matured. And I just want y'all to watch and see how the colors are changing on this brain. All right, let me see. I don't know if I can play that again without having to dig down to my computer. I'll watch that one more time. All right, so you can see that not all parts of the brain mature at the same rate. This is an image showing those differences in maturity. In a few regions, we've got some social cognition regions here. And then also this front of the brain, that prefrontal cortex, that is one of the last parts of the brain to fully mature. Just kind of a quick show of hands. How many of y'all heard by now that it's not fully mature until your early 20s? Your brain is not developing by then. Great, you can put your hands down. So that's the part of the brain that's still developing into your early 20s. It's that prefrontal cortex region. This has, I think, really trickled down in popular science. As an Allstate ad, why do your 16-year-olds drive like they're missing a part of the brain? Because they are, right? So people kind of have a sense of this. So that prefrontal cortex is really important for what we call kind of our higher level cognition. So things like thinking about the future, thinking about potential consequences, inhibiting our initial impulses, exerting control, self-control, cognitive control, that's all thought to be driven by that prefrontal cortex. And so what happens is we've got these adolescent brains that really like social stimuli, that really like rewards, that still have a relatively immature prefrontal cortex, and now you've got this ideal social media user that might really have a hard time stopping their social media use. I might have a really hard time thinking, gee, if I watch another 30 minutes of TikTok videos, I'm not going to finish my math homework today. Right? So this is why we might want to be really careful about our adolescents' relationship with technology, because their brains are driving them to want to have these rewarding social interactions online, not so good at getting them to stop. And of course, the tech companies know this as well, right? So also the phones and the apps, they are engineered to keep us online as much as possible. So we see this in actual data from what teens say they're doing. So this is showing change over time from 2014 to the most recent year of the survey, 2022. As of 2022, about half of all teens say they're online almost constantly. The other half basically say they're like slightly less than that, but still on multiple times a day. Here's some data from Common Sense Media, looking at daily entertainment screen use. This is broken down by tweens, so 8 to 12-year-olds, and teens, 13 to 8-year-olds. This is also showing from 2015 to 2021, increasing amount of time spent on screens. And this is for entertainment, not for school, not for homework. This can be things like watching YouTube videos, looking at, just being online, interacting with your friends, etc. At the Winston Center, we have actually found that we can see differences in brain development over time as a function of how much social media kids are using as young as 6th and 7th grade. So this is a study we just published, I think about a year ago now, where we had 169 adolescents. That is a really big number for a neuroimaging study that's developmental and longitudinal. So they first came to our lab when they're about 12 or 13 years old. Right, at our first visit, we had them, we put them in the brain scanner, and we looked at how their brains responded to anticipating social feedback. So waiting to see if someone's going to smile at you or frown at you. And then we also, at that first visit, asked them, how often are you checking social media? So it's 12 and 13. Those 12-year-olds technically are not supposed to be on social media at all, right? They can check the box and say, yes, I'm 13 and make an account. Technically, they're not supposed to be there. And then we brought them back 1 year later and then another year after that. So we're tracking that brain development over time. All right, so what do we find? So we found that there are parts of the brain that seem to process things like emotion and reward that show different developmental trajectories based on how much social media use was happening in that first visit in 6th and 7th grade when they're 12 or 13. So the habitual kids, the kids who at age 12 were already checking social media over 15 times a day, their brains become increasingly sensitive to social feedback over time. Our moderate group of kids, they're using social media, checking it between 1 to 15 times per day. Their brains seem to show kind of the opposite trend, that they're becoming decreasingly sensitive to social feedback over time. And then green, those are the kids who are not using social media at all at the start of the study, and this brain region seems kind of stable, developmentally speaking, with regards to anticipating social feedback. So here we don't know, if one trajectory is better or worse than the other. We don't know if it's the social media use that's causing the brains to develop in this way, or if it's like if you have a brain that will develop in this way, that's going to push you to want to check social media 15 times or more a day. But this does really, I think, highlight that use it or lose it idea, right? That your brain is going to develop in a way that is shaped by what you are doing with that brain. And your brain is going to shape what you're doing, and we can see that across development. We also have a study that came out earlier this year where I believe it's a subset of that same population, about 100 kids in this one. At that first visit, they also asked about signs of, so put addiction in quotation marks because social media addiction is not officially recognized as a disorder, but it's things like I think about wanting to be online when I'm not. If I can't access my social media, I don't feel like I can go about my day, typically, stuff like that. Using social media is disrupting my everyday activities like school and sleep. Right? So the kids who were extremely high on that social media addiction scale, they're represented in red. The kids in blue are the ones who didn't endorse so many symptoms that look like it could be addiction to social media. And we also see, again, different developmental trajectories over time in a number of key brain regions related to processing reward and social cognition. So again, we are kind of at this point still agnostic to exactly what this means, but we are able to see through these studies looking at brain development over time that it does seem to be interacting with tech use and social media use in extremely meaningful ways. All right. So then the question for y'all, I have told you that if you have adolescents, that their brains are changing quite a bit. It's a time of being vulnerable, extreme vulnerability to mental health issues. So should you be worried about your kids' technology use? Or maybe we can zoom out a little bit at more of a societal level. Should we just kind of be worried as a society about how much time our kids are spending online? So here, as researchers, got ahead of myself. So this has been out in pop culture for a while. I'll just do quick shows of hands. How many of y'all have heard of this book, iGen by Jean Twenge? Okay, so this came out in 2017. Jonathan Haidt's The Anxious Generation. All right, so this came out early. This one just came out in March, and they're already publishing a paperback version of it. So it's been doing some good numbers. Phone-free schools movement, putting phones in. It's kind of, when I was a kid, we used those for graphing calculators, but now they're for phones. Or these Yonder pouches, you can lock phones up for the day, and then wait till 8th. All right, so a few of y'all, right. If you want to learn more about those last two, I believe there's some handouts up here from Mary Beth. Right, so these questions about should we be concerned about kids' tech use, right, that's trickled out into the mainstream, and of course it is, because y'all are living it, right? You're seeing kids around you, maybe your own kids on their phones, and you want to know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. All right, so it's pretty common for psychologists to think about things falling on a spectrum. We don't like to think about human behavior in absolutes. right? So on the spectrum between like we should all freak out and panic, society's over, to, whatever, we'll just be zen about it, what happens will happen, I would like to think that we should be somewhere in the middle, which is like a little bit wary about all these changes, but let's also be informed about what's happening and then kind of go from there, right? So my goal today is to leave you a little bit more informed about some of these questions about whether or not social media might actually cause mental health issues. Right, so the Surgeon General has told us we are in a youth mental health crisis. He most recently has said that we should put a warning label on social media platforms saying that social media use has been associated with mental health issues. But the question that we really should be focusing on as researchers is, does social media actually cause mental health issues, right? So what we know from the research, what we are trying to summarize at the center, what we're trying to dig out better is getting beyond that big picture question and getting into the details. So that's where we are now at the center and with research. So when we're thinking about whether or not social media causes mental health issues, you want to think about what's going on with the social media use and also what's going on with the user, characteristics of the user as well. So for online activities, it really matters what people are doing online. Right? To put this on another spectrum of things that are definitely bad, some things definitely bad. If your kids are doing these things online, you should really seek help, talk to the school counselor, right? Maybe talk to a therapist. So these are things like looking at content that is advocating for self-harm. Right? On the other side of that spectrum, definitely good. Being able to connect with your friends in really positive ways and feel closer to your friends and feel socially supported with your friends, that is definitely a good thing, definitely a bad thing. There are websites out there with really troubling images of so-called inspiration. It's really harmful for youth mental health, and it is really often these sites can encourage kids to engage in really problematic eating behaviors, right? On the flip side, definitely a good thing, the fact that social media is much more accessible for people of all shapes and body sizes and all different skin tones. That has now led to much better representation in the media of what different bodies can look like and help people who might not kind of fit the mainstream mass media portrayal of what an ideal body might look like. And then there's kind of an open question of, well, what about all the other stuff my kid is doing? And the best I can tell you is it really depends on your kid and exactly what they're doing. I will revisit that in a bit. Other things that might be problematic, signs of digital stress. So we can conceptualize digital stress in a few different ways. This idea of connection overload, feeling like there's so many platforms that you could be on, you have to check all of them. I hear these from my students sometimes, like after you finish scrolling through TikTok, now it's time to see if anybody sent you any new snaps, and then you're gonna check your Insta, and then, let's just circle back to TikTok and see if anyone's gone back there, right? Availability stress is feeling like you always have to be available to your peers or your friends online. So we hear this from like, if I don't text my friend back within a certain amount of time, they're gonna think I don't like them anymore. Right? I feel like I have to respond in order to be a good friend. Fear of missing out, FOMO, that kind of idea has kind of trickled down. Or maybe we stole the term from teens, I'm not sure which direction that goes, but right, you're watching other people have fun online, or you're watching other people's amazing lives as they appear to be online, and you're not part of that. Then approval anxiety, kind of feel like you have to craft some online persona about yourself, and that makes you feel anxious about how that might be taken by your peers. All right, so these are some signs of potentially worrying behaviors. I should say these feelings are all normal, they're typical to have, but if they become too extreme or too problematic, that might be then time to have a conversation. We also want to care about when this digital media use is happening. So you probably have heard this now, avoid screens before and during sleep. So this study was the gray line. So this study asked a bunch of teenagers to stop using their phones after 9 o'clock at night. So the gray lines are baseline before they enrolled in the study, how much sleep were they getting each night. The blue lines were after they were told or asked and educated about the importance of sleep and asked to stop using their phones after 9 o'clock. And you can see, especially as kids get older, right, they're more independent and in charge of their own bedtimes. It can be really beneficial to stop using your phones, this is not phones, this is screens, after 9 o'clock at night. especially for older kids, that is buying them an extra 30 to 45 minutes more of that precious sleep that they're probably not getting enough of in adolescence. This figure on the right is from one of our Winston Center studies. This is a sample of North Carolina adolescents. I can't see my notes from here. I think they were 12 to 15-year-olds maybe. Don't quote me on that. This is the average number of minutes they're spending on their screens. And if you can't see from wherever you're sitting, this is 10 minutes of screen time, which doesn't sound like a lot until you realize that 11 p.m., 12 a.m., 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m., 5 a.m., 6 a.m. Right? So these are kids who are waking up in the middle of the night. Maybe they get a notification. Maybe they're just waking up to go to the bathroom. And then they pick up their phones, and then they get caught up on their phones. And then they're staying awake instead of sleeping in the middle of the night. Right? So a common recommendation, charge the phones outside of the bedroom. Don't even have that temptation there for kids if they do have their own phones. We also think you should avoid the distraction of screens during learning at school. There's tons of studies about this, that being distracted by your phones, mostly done in college students, leads to worse memory of whatever's happening in lecture. You can come into my classroom and I could probably tell you it's the same case for kids who are goofing off in the back of my room, classroom 2. This study I like showing because they had 3 different conditions. They had people either put the phone face down on their desks, put the phones in their pocket or their purse near them, or leave the phones in another room entirely. And the more distant the phone is, the better their performance on these little tasks measuring their working memory and their fluid intelligence, which is, I believe in this one, it's logical reasoning metrics. So this suggests that even just having your phone nearby, even if you're not using it, is enough of a distraction to impair learning in some ways. There's also some work suggesting that what we call media multitasking, so using your phone while you're watching TV or using your phone in class, self-reported engagement of that behavior negatively correlates with GPA, both at the high school and the college level, negatively correlates with standardized test scores. So the more you use your phones when you should be doing other things, the worse your grades are, the worse you score on end of year tests. I will say those studies, there's a big caveat that those are correlational, so it could be that kids who would score lower also would want to be on their phones more, but it does suggest that potentially, right, that being distracted in class on your phone's not a good thing. And then the last piece, I think we get this question a lot, is well, should I set some limits on screen time? How much screen time is too much screen time? Officially, the only recommendation that is out there by any major body is from the American Academy of Pediatrics, looking at really little kids. We don't have big picture recommendations for kids, tweens, and teens yet, but there are some correlational studies that are suggestive. So this is a study looking at US adolescents. It's a huge sample, and they are plotting the number of hours a day they're spending using digital media and happiness ratings. And so what we see here is that there's kind of a little boost in happiness from being on screens about an hour a day, and then it kind of seems to decline from there. So we call this a Goldilocks effect, that there might be kind of just amount effect where just using screens a little bit seems to be good, and then the more you use it, you got these kind of diminishing returns. I shouldn't say that. Actually, it's worse than diminishing returns, that it's actually making folks feel worse as screen time increases. So this is a US sample. These are data, I believe these are data from a British sample. So this seems to be not just limited to the US, that again, we see this kind of a little boost from a little bit and then a drop the more you use it. So it might be the case that it's not great to kind of cut kids off from their phones entirely, that they can get a little bit of a mood boost, whether that be from watching silly TikToks or cat videos or chatting with their friends. But at some point, it can become excessive. And so we want to tell families is you and your kids and your families will have to figure out when that drop-off point starts to become problematic. All right, and then the other side of this equation, besides what you're doing online, we're also recognizing and really learning and seeing from research that it also really matters who is using the device as well. So for characteristics of the user, there seems to be certain vulnerabilities based on age and also gender identity. Here they're plotting the data for the girls up here, and then for the boys down here. And this figure is showing where social media use at this age, the more you use social media, the worse your life satisfaction is at the next time you do the study. So anytime where the lines are dipping below the line, being highlighted by these gray bars, that's when, that is when that social media use. So those are the ages in which social media use seems to actually predict later worse satisfaction in life. And if you notice the ages, which are highlighted there, so for girls, it's at age 11 to 13. For boys, ages 14 to 15. We'll just 3, 2, 1 yell out what you notice. What do you think is happening at those ages? 3, 2, 1. Puberty, right? That we think there's this offset in those ages by gender because puberty, girls go through puberty a little earlier than boys do. So that might be one window where that social media use might potentially be problematic. That social media use when you're going through puberty might actually cause worse life satisfaction later. And then the other age that's for both genders is at age 19. We speculate that this has something to do with kids, that's an age when kids have gone off to college, or they've left their families behind. It's another time of kind of a big life change where they might be especially vulnerable. All right. We also want to keep in mind that the impact of social media on mental health can also interact with folks of minoritized identities, whether that be your sexual identity or your racial or ethnic identity. So there are many ways in which social media has actually been beneficial for folks with these minoritized identities. So online is a way that you can find social connectedness and identity affirmation that you might not be able to get in person. It can be a way where people can have, where you can see or follow along with discussions about systemic issues or identity issues that you might not be hearing in your local communities, or that you might not be able to access, or you might feel like you're the only one who thinks this way. And you can go online and see that other people share these thoughts or these experiences that you may have had. And then it's opportunity for adolescents to engage in, to view and engage with activism as well. Now sometimes we joke about slacktivism, like you sign a petition and you feel like you've done something good. But when you're a young person and you're kind of new to this world, this way of thinking about how you can change the world, having access to these online spaces, these online opportunities might be a really good thing, right? So kind of want y'all to keep in mind that when we talk about potentially taking away smartphones or taking away social media from youth, that there are some youth that might be harmed by that because those online interactions are really a lifeline for them. And then also for folks who have minoritized identities, especially for LGBTQ+ youth, online might be a safer space to explore that. It might not be safe for you to come out to your family, but online, no one knows who you are. That's a place where you can kind of explore what it means to be questioning your gender identity or your sexual identity. On the flip side, our minoritized youth also face greater risk online. Just like in person, they are subject to more bullying online, more discrimination, they'll see stereotypes, they receive more threats of harm. For our LGBTQ+ youth, there's a chance that they could be outed online, which can have repercussions for them at home. And they also, especially for our LGBTQ+ youth, tend to be exposed to more problematic materials about self-harm, and which can put them at greater risk of depression and self-harm as well. So there's some benefits and then some things to watch out for as well. I think, in the interest of time, I'll go through, I'm going to skip the slides on this one, but I'll just tell you that we also know that these effects of social media on mental health interact with social status. So popular kids tend to do better. Kids who are lower in popularity, they tend to be a little bit more vulnerable. Also interactions with mental health status. Some aspects of being able to communicate online are great for kids with mental health issues. They can find more support online. If you're a kid who's a little bit socially anxious, being able to really think about and plan what you're going to say to your friends is actually really helpful. But then there are also vulnerabilities. Research has suggested that kids or people who have higher levels of depression seem to tend to benefit more from taking a little bit of a break from social media. So lots of interactions with mental health as well. All right, so I'll end on these last few slides. Now that I've told you all the stuff, what should you do? So we have a few kind of big picture recommendations that we like to make. So one is to think about screen time as a diet. If you're like me and you grew up when we were still using this food pyramid, I think this is a modernized version. It doesn't say that we're supposed to eat like 20 servings of bread a day anymore. But if you remember that food pyramid, you can apply that idea to technology use as well. Right? That there's some ways of using technology that are really beneficial, like, well, there's growth out there, educational media is good. Other things like gaming, watching movies for fun, still probably okay in moderation. And then as we kind of go up that list, there are things that we should definitely really try to avoid, like, I think this is supposed to represent using screens late at night. Right? So think about what you're doing on your screens like a diet. There's no good food or bad food, but there are some foods that are better to have more versus less of. Some people maybe should avoid certain foods, just like some folks should avoid using social media in certain ways. I'll skip this one in the interest of time, but I'll just tell you that the APA last year, the American Psychological Association, published a health advisory about social media use in adolescents. It's really well written. It has a lot of concrete steps of things to do. Some of that, I'll just cherry pick a few. Developmentally appropriate adult monitoring. This might mean that when you and your family decide that you're ready for your kids to have a smartphone, have a lot more guardrails out when you first start, and then as they get older, more independent, more responsible, you can start backing off some of that monitoring. Be careful about exposure to cyberbullying, avoid interference with sleep and exercise, and then here's a big one that we could all do a better job of: teach kids how to use social media. Don't just, in some ways, probably the kids will have to teach you a little bit about how, like, the nitty-gritty of it works, but you should at least talk to your kids about what they're seeing, how they're interacting, right? What are the potential benefits and consequences of what they're doing. All right, with that, I will stop here. The two QR codes, the one on the left is the website for our Winston National Center. We have a few resources up there for parents. Part of my job is working on getting more resources up there. And then on the right side, if you would like to sign up for your email list, you're welcome to do so. We don't know what we're doing with that email list yet, but if we do decide to send out public-facing information, you can sign up to get those emails if and when that happens. All right, I'll stop here and I'll take questions. Thanks. Right, yeah.
You showed an interesting graph of the phone on the desk versus in the pocket.
Yeah.
Ended up green. What about with the phone turned up?
Oh, so the question is, so if y'all can hear there's a figure with the phone on the desk. I think I told you it was face down. What would happen if it was face up? I would just have to be a lot more distracting, because then you could actually see the notifications coming in. That study also has an interesting additional twist, which is they asked participants, they got the metric of how, like, dependent people felt on their smartphones, and folks who felt really dependent on their smartphones were the ones who kind of were like, had that most interference of having the phones nearby or visible. But yeah, so it'll be interesting to see, especially with the new, those Yonder pouches. That's one of the pictures. I think some schools are using those. You can have your phone, but you can't see it. I don't know if that is going to still be distracting for kids. Yep.
Are there studies that are looking at screen use explicitly in schools for learning and how that interacts with screen use?
Yeah, so the question is, are there studies looking at screen use for learning and how that interacts with maybe what we'll call like screen use for more distracting ways? So that is a massive literature that is beyond my expertise. My understanding is that there's definitely a lot of ways in which educational technology is beneficial in the classroom, right? That a lot of, if you're using software for teaching, you'd be a lot more tailored to individual students. That could potentially be really helpful. The issue is when the other things on those screens might be more distracting. So just in my conversations with teachers, mostly at the middle and high school level, that even with firewalls and stuff, kids often still find workarounds to get to access things. The interesting one I've heard of is that they use Google Docs to work on stuff in class, and they use the Google Doc chat function, or they just use the Google Doc itself to like chat with each other, right? So that type of behavior is going to detract from the learning experience. So I think if you poll most researchers in this space about like phone-free schools and stuff, they'll all agree that having phones during learning is known to be problematic and potentially distracting. I think it's still an open question about what happens, when the learning is done and they're in social spaces. What's the effect of taking the phones away all day, and that we still don't know yet. Yeah, in the back.
Speak a little bit on the idea of age 13 being the age of social media,
Yeah.
and how that comes to be, and kind of the benefits of what those kids at that age is going to be. And I don't know, there's
Yeah, so the question is sort of let's start with why is 13 the age that tech companies have decided that now this kid can use social media? I don't know. When I go through that exercise about how you define adolescence, I tell my students, like, why do we say 13 is the potential start of adolescence? Because it ends in teen in our language, and so that seems convenient. I'm sure there might be some sort of legal precedent cases around 13 seems to be old enough to be responsible for some things. I don't think there's any really strong empirical evidence that when you go from 12 to 13, something magically changes, right? But similarly for 16 being a legal driving age, it's not something magical that happens between 15 and 16, and we're recognizing that now by having more graduated driver's license programs. I believe Jonathan Haidt in his book is pushing for 16 as being an age at which social media should be making kids wait until they're 16 for social media use. I don't know if there's super strong empirical research-based evidence for that being that cutoff age. That might be more of a societal thing that we've accepted that 16 is more independence for driving, and therefore maybe they'll also be more ready for phone-related independence. What we tell families is you know your kids the best, and you know best what they may or may not be ready for. So I think I saw a handout here about how to tell when your kids are ready for a phone, and part of that is do they understand what it means to have a phone? Can they be responsible for it in the literal sense of they're not going to lose this $800 computer that you just handed them, but also do they know how to behave appropriately online? Do you have a relationship where if they get themselves into trouble somehow, that they're going to come ask you for help, right? And in those cases, it's not that different from handing your kids the keys to the car, that you want your kids to be willing to call you if they get themselves into a tough spot. So the same thing with the phones there. Yeah.
Regarding 13 being the quote age of whatever social media wants to call it in terms of maturity, there was no long thought out process of determining that kids were appropriately able to handle social media at 13. That goes back to the late 1990s with the rules of the internet when that was coming to be, and it was decided at that time that 13 was the age of an adult online, but again in 1998 we didn't have social media. So there is legislation pending right now kind of looking at that age, but just wanted to mention kind of that's from the 90s when the internet was coming to be and how they decided 13 was kind of the age, and then that's been adopted by the social media companies as a result.
Yeah, I also actually want to note about new legislation and new changes. There's a number of laws that are trickling out kind of state by state, starting to restrict how old kids, the age when kids can sign up for social media. There's the Kids Online Safety Act, which has passed the Senate. Who knows if it'll ever get brought up in the House because of our dysfunctional federal government. And I believe Instagram, if I remember correctly, just added new teen controls, so now I believe 13 through 15 They have a more kind of lockdown version with more parental supervision for an Instagram account. And then when they're 16, some of those features, that I think they no longer have to have some of those parent monitoring features at that age. Yeah, and the black.
They say that social media is kind of designed to be addictive.
Yeah.
It is kind of so much harm. Is there a way to avoid that addictiveness and try to use it responsibly?
Great, yes. The question is, they say that social media is designed to be addictive and to keep you online. Are there ways to avoid that? So for the first part, yes, it is definitely designed that way. They spend tons and tons of money. I can think of off the top of my head 4 or 5 of my friends from grad school who now work for these big tech companies. They know at least as much about human behavior as I do. And they're getting paid at least 3 times as much as I am probably to work on these platforms. So very smart people are working on these platforms. They make money by keeping you on the platforms. So there's some recommendations. So number one, we think for kids it just kind of helps to emphasize the fact that like you are the product that is being sold online. So your eyeballs, your attention, like that's what the social media companies want. Like they're taking advantage of you in that way. That kind of messaging is thought to kind of get teenagers to think like, I don't want to be anyone's pawn. There are other recommendations are you can turn your phone into grayscale mode so the red notifications don't pop up as much. They're red for a reason. Red is like very salient for us. It catches our visual attention. If they're gray, they don't stand out as much. And I know I don't use TikTok because I'm afraid of what it will do to me if I have it. But at least for like YouTube, you can turn off autoplay so it doesn't keep the next video going. And I believe some of the new features that are rolling out in these platforms give you a little bit more control over what you see. I forget which one. I think maybe Insta is now giving you the option to like opt out of some of the algorithm stuff. So you get maybe more of a chronological feed. But they're still going to show you ads because that's where their money comes from. So keep that in mind. Yep.
When you refer to social media
Yeah.
and having limits, what words texting and face, the
Great.
screen facing experience, how does that fall into that awareness?
Yeah, so the question was when we talk about social media, what about texting and FaceTime? So we generally tend to think that FaceTime is closer to an in-person interaction, so potentially less concerning. And then texting, when it's like one-on-one and private, that is, it gets rid of some of the design features that you see in social media that might be problematic. So you're not, you're not seeing an algorithm of like which of your friends' texts are going to come up higher. You're not chasing the number of likes or views in the way that you would be if you posted something on TikTok or on Instagram. That being said, when you're texting people, they can still take screenshots. So whatever you're texting, you think it's private, right? You can take a photo of that. You can't take a photo of a conversation when it's not being recorded. But when you text your friends, that can be captured. So there are still some ways where kids can get themselves into trouble, but it's thought to be, again, it just doesn't have as many of those designed, engineered features to keep attention. Yeah.
You talk a lot about social media, and of course there's so much reception, so much being talked about that. What about video games and their technologies and sort of them attaching to the idea that kids are going to respond well to rewards?
Yeah, so the question was about video games. They're also rewarding. So there's kind of different levels of video games. The like little games on your phone that are full of like microtransactions. Those are really engineered to get people to part with their money in little bits. When you more, I don't know what the right word is, more like console level games like Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo level. Let me think about how I want to answer that. So those traditionally have not been lumped in with social media. There's some folks at our center who are trying to argue for we should also think about these in a social way because kids often play games with their friends online. And that can be another way that social interactions can be happening for better or for worse. In terms of like reward and addiction, so social media addiction is not yet in the official handbook of mental health disorders that are recognized in the US. Internet gaming addiction is in there as a condition for future study. So that includes things like the gaming is interfering with like your everyday responsibilities for school or work or family. It can be feeling irritable when you're not allowed to game, like kind of craving, feeling preoccupied about the game when you're not using it, stuff like that. And the prevalence of that is pretty low. I don't know the exact numbers off the top of my head. I believe it's like 1%-ish in this country, but I have to double check that. Interestingly, it is higher in some Asian countries where gaming is much more prominent. I believe, I might be getting this mixed up with gambling addiction too. But I think it's more like up to as high as maybe 8% in South Korea, but don't quote me on that. I'd have to fact check myself on that. So yeah, it is potentially problematic, but the prevalence rate is relatively low. And there are, if you just Google internet gaming disorder, there's tons of materials out there about the signs to watch out for there. Yeah, the big things we think about when we talk about addiction in general, it's interfering with your everyday life in a way that's problematic, and it's like causing distress in some way. Those are kind of the hallmarks of addiction that we want to watch out for. Yeah.
In your slides, you showed like a balanced approach, and I think I heard you say that in that anxious generation, you're suggesting hold off of social media till 16. Mm-hmm. Is there any like research, like if an adolescent's peer group is all on social media and they're excluded?
Yeah.
Negative impact of that being excluded?
So that's a great question. So the question is, what happens if like all your friends are online and you're the one not online? What are the impacts of being excluded? I think the answer is we don't know yet. We would love to do that study. The challenge is finding enough kids in that group. One of my colleagues, not one of my research colleagues, one of my just work colleagues, was talking like casually about their kids. They said that you don't want your family to be the first or the last to give their kids the phone. And I think that really resonates with a lot of people. That's why things like that wait until 8th, I'm judging down here because I think there's a handout about it, the wait until 8th initiative where you kind of get the whole community to sign on so your kid does not feel like they're being left out might be beneficial. I don't think we have any like peer-reviewed research studies on that yet. Kind of what we know in general about like adolescent desire to fit in, to not want to be the kid that's different, at least at those younger ages, early adolescence. I would personally guess that's probably a good thing to try to kind of get the whole community on board if you're trying to wait, or at least making sure your kid is not the only one who has a phone, if possible. That being said, Jim Winston, who is one of our liaison with the Winston Foundation that funds our center, he waited till his kid was, I forget, 16 or 17 before he got a phone. And he reports it was hard, his kids struggle a lot, but now that he's 16 or 17, he says, like, Dad, I understand why you made me wait. I see my friends kind of with their noses stuck in the screen, they can't get out of it, and I'm glad that I didn't turn out like that. So, that's just one person's experience. It might really depend on your kids and their social interactions. Yeah.
This information that you shared tonight, I'm thinking about a teen audience. If there are resources, if we want to share this with our children, are there options that are really tailored to a teen audience?
Yes, the question is, what do we do for teen audiences? So there's a few groups out there. So Common Sense Media is the big one in the space of digital media literacy in general. So they have curricula for K through 12 and they do like some nice videos where they interview teens talking about their experiences. I don't know, Mary Beth, if you want to plug the journal that y'all are working on with the Better Screens group. Is it Better Screens? Better Screen Time. So Mary Beth works with a group called Better Screen Time. I just reviewed this journal that they're planning to publish at some point, soonish, which has some really nice prompts for, I looked at the teen version, but it has teen versions of nice prompts about like, think about what you're doing, what is good, what is bad, what are you giving up when you're on your screens, stuff like that. So hopefully that'll be a nice resource for adolescents. What else is out there? Those are the kind of two that I can think of off the top of my head that are, especially Common Sense Media is really like evidence-based, which is a thing. Yeah.
So any of this coming into the schools, right? Or is this all on parents?
Yeah, so there's this information in general, or
Yeah.
things about controlling or regulating smartphone use?
Just like what's happening with the brains and some of these graphs and things like that. Are there places or programs
Yeah.
where it's happening at school?
Yeah, so we are trying. I worked with, the reason why I spent a lot of time talking to middle school teachers is I worked with one down in Miami to create kind of a more neuroscience-based curriculum. Actually, neuroscience and core, so we include neuroscience in this digital media literacy curriculum that we've developed. I've given some talks for educators. There's increasing legislation about introducing digital media literacy classes in the same way that you would have health classes. Right now in North Carolina, we do not have those laws, but the health standards for health class, they do have a few standards that like at least touch on understanding like safe versus risky behaviors online and stuff like that. So I think it's like starting to become more prominent, and there are a few states where that digital media literacy is required. I would hope and assume that it's probably going to be much more widespread. Yeah.
So these statistics in the models bring to the conclusion is basically statistically impossible. To say possible.
You say collusion? Sorry, what do you mean by that?
Well, one of that is, it's, someone always wants to cheat the game. And so as a community, we're experiencing groups of parents saying, hey, we're not going to send our kids to school with phones. And then kids at home and they so has a phone. We're talking 8 years old.
Yeah.
So not 11 or
Yeah.
How, is there any hope that we're going to actually see legal information where kids, when I grew up, it's so against me.
Yeah.
Because I have that old.
Yeah, the legal, yeah. Yeah, the legal question's a complicated one. Again, that Kids Online Safety Act is also is somewhat controversial. The ACLU is against it because they think it'll also, it's supposed to protect kids and what they are exposed to online and hold tech companies accountable, but the ACLU is concerned that it might also keep kids from finding the resources that they need. Again, it's passed the Senate, I think it was like 98-2 or 97-3 or something like that. But the current Speaker of the House does not seem like he's planning to bring that to a vote anytime soon. And so it's currently kind of stuck at the federal level. At the state level, a number of states have implemented laws restricting, they've tried to restrict like the times in which kids can use social media use, so they're trying to restrict like the ages. California just signed a law banning smartphones in schools, but I think the individual schools can decide exactly what that's going to look like. So I think there's some political will there in certain pockets, but kind of beyond that is beyond my expertise on the political side of things. Yeah, so I don't have much more promising. Yeah, and I think in the case where, not every single family in the school is signing on, I don't know if I have a great solution there for you, except try to, I guess, find the families that share your values in the same way that you would for other things. Yeah.
My daughter is 15 years old, and she's now.
Okay.
And
Great.
I've seen her
Yeah.
improve, like, and I know it's going to be tough and it is tough for many parents, but I've seen like you.
Yeah, so folks in here, this gentleman has a 15-year-old who doesn't have a phone. He says some good things. Maybe I guess Meredith's trying to get me help. So if y'all are sticking around for the chats, you can talk more about how you convinced your daughter to sign on for that. Yeah. Yeah, I've had one family, this is obviously not accessible to every single family, but one family has decided they offered their kid, instead of buying you a phone and paying for data, I will give you that money when you finish high school, and you can do as you please with it. So you can try bribing your kids.